If you're looking to find Tyrese Maxey this summer, the gym is probably the right place to check. Not only is the young Sixers star committed to his 1% better everyday mantra, but he's been joined by one of the biggest legends in all of NBA history by working out alongside LeBron James. We have a couple notable quotes coming from Tyrese Maxey on what the experience was like, and I do want to reflect on why this does mean something to me, that there is a relationship there, how cool that I think the entire picture of it, and why there could be some long-term beneficial factors to this from the Sixers' direction. So let's get right into the topic of today, and do want to start off with this headline coming from LeBron Wire originally here, which is titled "Sixers star Tyrese Maxey marvels at LeBron James fitness regimen." And a couple quotes that I did want to highlight is number one, he was asked about working out with the all-time leading scorer, and Maxey said, quote, "I think the biggest thing for me and what I can take from him is just his passion for the game. Like, I'm extremely passionate. I love basketball. Anytime I can do anything that pertains to basketball, I want to do it. But this man is going on like year 23, and he was working out and talking and involved like it was probably year 5 for him. You know what I'm saying? And that's amazing to see. I think anybody who's able to watch him, not just work out, but play, should feel honored because it's amazing. And regardless of your feelings on LeBron James, I'm not the number one LeBron guy in my heart of hearts either, that I've always sat a little bit closer to the Jordan conversation, although I've come closer to the light as LeBron continues to get the job done in this advanced stage of his career. But nonetheless, this is basketball immortality. This is a guy who is very clearly one of the 2 best players of all time, and pretty cool that he's taken Maxey under his wing a little bit. And another quote that I did want to pull up here was the second part, that he was asked if James has been helpful toward his own efforts. And Maxey's quote was, "I don't know how many times I've worked out with him now," Maxey admitted. I mean, that's crazy to say, and I guess that's how I know I'm getting a little old. But yeah, it's good work, man. It's good work. He does a good job of talking and just being vocal and helping. I'm very appreciative of him. He's done a lot. And the article finishes off by stating, Maxey, who is 24 years of age, happens to also be represented by Rich Paul's Clutch Sports Group. And that is more than a coincidence, I will note here, as that is how a lot of the relationships in the NBA get done here. It is an agency-based sort of standpoint here that we see a lot of player movement that is dictated by what those relationships are. And I think Tyrese Maxey having a strong relationship with Clutch and the Sixers indirectly here is something that could benefit the franchise in a major way in the long haul. I also think the Sixers are probably viewed in fairly positive light, with one of the bigger tipping point moments, with that being the Ben Simmons holdout. Ben Simmons, also a Clutch Sports client, or used to be before everything went off the rails and the agency left him as well. But the Sixers, I think, stood in and handled that business as well as they possibly could have. I still think Daryl Morey deserves more flowers and more credit for managing to get a James Harden in return for a guy that straight up would not have played another game for the Sixers franchise. Sure, we can split hairs and argue about Tyrese Halliburton. I do think it's important to note that the Tyrese Halliburton at that time was not the Tyrese Halliburton that we currently know. And ultimately, the case in making that trade was about winning with Joel Embiid right now. I still see where Daryl Morey did his calculations and decided that bringing in a James Harden, who is more quote-unquote in his prime, or a guy that we knew exactly what he was as a basketball player, compared to a guy like Tyrese Halliburton, who ultimately was still emerging. And there still were questions about how would the fit be, how good can this guy truly be. I get where he landed there. Again, we can all have the 2020 revisionist history, or looking back, and the hindsight is obviously perfect there. But nonetheless, I get why he took the swing, and I do think matters were handled fine there. Now, the Ben Simmons standpoint here, I also think is kind of cool, because let's not forget about what a mini LeBron this guy was talked to be for quite some time, since before he made it to the NBA. And there was the same relationships there, a guy who skill set wise or raw athleticism, frame, are all things that did draw those comparisons to LeBron. It is pretty crazy to me that we've seen that guy, the number 1 overall pick, basically fall off the entire map of the NBA, that at this current point is still unsigned. And boy, am I praying that he goes to the New York Knicks. I keep seeing those rumors pop up, and I would love nothing more than to see him be absolutely unraveled by the New York fan base, because it isn't going to be any better than Philadelphia. They're going to do the exact same things that Sixers fans did. You better believe it. And there is not these high hopes of him ascending beyond what he just kind of is at this stage of this game. I also think there's a non-zero chance where Ben Simmons is just straight up unsigned, which also would be a little bit hilarious in itself. But nonetheless, I'm done wishing ill will on Ben. There is a part of me that just feels like kind of sad that that is the version of him that it turns out. But shout out to Tyrese Maxey to being a guy that is the exact antithesis of the former number 1 pick, who is committed to maximizing what his potential is and getting to the best version of him as a basketball player. And by the way, when taking a look at a couple of these pictures of the workouts here, there is something that I think is a bit notable. Look at Tyrese Maxey standing next to LeBron James, and shout out to Chris Johnson Hoops, also in the picture, and I presumably ran that session there. they do not look that different in height to me there, which is pretty crazy to stand out. That is LeBron James at all 6'8" and Tyrese Maxey listed roughly around 6'3". Depends on what day that you do get him out for how tall he is in his actuality. But this was pointed out in the comments, to which Maxey replied. Shout out to Legs, who tweeted, "Did you grow at Tyrese Maxey?" And Maxey quote tweets it saying, "Glad you noticed," with a couple emojis there. Now, who knows how legitimate this is? This could have been just the angle of the picture. You can see in it that LeBron a little bit at a lean back spot, so I'm sure it's not that much of a change. But if Tyrese Maxey did sprout a couple inches, that does help change the equation for how do all these guards fit together. Once again, I will continue to pound the table and argue that Tyrese Maxey is at least a league average defender at this stage of the game, and I do think that he will ultimately settle above that level. That I do think this guy is going to be a guy that is well capable of being the worst defender on a very high-level defense, and potentially much more than that. That I don't think this is a guy that you can single out and bully, as was the case when he first did come into the NBA there. And if he grew a couple inches, that changes the equation for who they could possibly match him up with. Again, this is all just looking through a couple workout pictures. We have nothing set in stone, but that is encouraging to see nonetheless. Now, a couple other factors that I did want to dive into with Tyrese Maxey here. It does feel that there is this sense within the fan base that this is who he is, and I just find that completely wrong. When you look at his stats for last year, played 37.7 minutes per game there, averaged 26.3 points, 3.3 rebounds, 6.1 assists, shot just 43.7% from the field and 33.7% from beyond the three-point arc. Some pretty uncharacteristic numbers for a guy who has grown as one of the more efficient shooters in the entire NBA in recent years, and I am willing to chalk a lot of that up to the circumstance of what last season was. I think each of these players you got to view through a pretty different lens than is typically the case at the conclusion of an NBA season. This was a team not trying to win for the entire second half of the season and had guys that they were just introduced to in the morning suiting up to them to play next to them in an actual game by that night. That is how the entire second half of the season. They broke the NBA record for most unique starting lineups across the season. They had 30 different players suit up and play a game last season. That it is not a normal NBA year by any franchise's standards. And the Sixers in particular here, I do think Tyrese Maxey was unfortunately the guy left bearing the results of this. That with Paul George and Joel Embiid sitting on the sideline, it was Maxey that continued to suit up for battle and continue to compete. And by the way, with those shooting efficiency numbers, there also was a stretch where Tyrese Maxey was limited to shooting with 3 fingers because of an injury that he sustained to his hand. I think it was malpractice that he was allowed to continue playing through that, but it's also a credit to the way that this guy is wired and the way that he does want to continue to compete here. When looking at his overall stats, you can see the progression here. And obviously, the situation does matter in each of these, that in the early parts of his career under Doc Rivers, he was basically handled with kid gloves there, not allowed to take on a larger role than he probably did earn when reflecting back on it, that he did swing a playoff game in his rookie season. That's how good that he looked to immediately be, but we have seen his level of opportunity expanded. He also was a guy who very much benefited from that Ben Simmons holdout that I mentioned earlier in the video, that if it were not for that, we still may be fighting about this guy deserves more opportunity. I would like to think that Nick Nurse would have seen the light and seen it a bit clearer for who this guy actually is, but he likely is not thrown into that starting lineup if it were not for that Ben Simmons holdout. Let's not forget that in that first James Harden season, you can see the numbers that he only started 41 of the 60 games that he did play in the 22-23 season. That is pretty absurd for a guy in his third year and made an all-star game that following season. That is who Tyrese Maxey is, and the work rate, the way that he continues to build up his game, I think is admirable, and I think sets the tone for this entire Sixers organization. It's great to see him working out with LeBron James. Again, a guy that regardless of your opinion of him, you have to respect the way that he's committed to his craft, has built up his body, is doing it at such a high level and for such a long period of time, and I would love to see Tyrese Maxey following in those exact footsteps. That is not an easy relationship to build, and clearly one that I do think means something to each of these guys. LeBron is not just working out with anybody here. If Karis LeVert hits up LeBron James in the DMs, you think they're hopping in the gym together? I think probably not is the answer, although I may have picked a Chris Johnson and Clutch guy. Nonetheless, the point being here that Tyrese Maxey has to be viewed a bit special in LeBron's eyes, and I think he should be viewed in the same way of each of ours. So do not be in a rush to chase this guy out of the town, to sort through which of these guard prospects or guard players are ultimately going to be foundational pieces versus which are a bit moving parts. There will be some long-term discussions about what is the best pathway for this franchise to build out their roster, but for the time being, it should be buckle up, enjoy the ride, and see what each of these guys brings to the table next season. Let me know what you guys think about each of that and what your full expectations are for Tyrese Maxey. I firmly believe right now that he will be back in the All-Star game next year. I think there's a real chance where he looks like the best player on the Sixers team next season, and you can make a case that it's been that way even dating back here. Joel Embiid, the obvious comparison. But those availability issues are going to be interesting to see how they sort through, and I do find it highly unlikely that he's on the court for an expanded period of time beyond what we saw. It will be more than last year, but I don't think to the rate of him playing 65 games is in the cards maybe ever again. We'll see how everything shakes itself out, but Tyrese Maxey is very much going to be the vocal leader of this Sixers franchise, likely moving forward, and who knows how long that goes on, and I do think the organization is in a great spot simply because of that. But let me know what you guys think about all that. Do you agree in the comments with my overall premise? And what's your height prediction for Tyrese Maxey? Think he got to 6'5", 6'4", 6'6" maybe? That would be pretty incredible, but still young, still growing. Who knows? We will see how things shake itself out. But drop that prediction in the comments. Appreciate each one of you guys tuning in this video as always. I know it is the dead of the offseason, but we continue plugging right here on Sixers Digest. So make sure you're hitting that subscribe button to follow along with us. Drop a like on this video. I'll be back talking with you next time. Peace.